Before we proceed, a word of caution. This content demands discretion from its audience. Presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes, what follows is the unedited federal courtroom testimony from the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as documented by Inner City Press. Step into this narrative with eyes wide open, for the truth unfolds in the stark light of justice. The air in the federal courtroom was thick, heavy with the hum of whispered strategies and the scratch of reporters' pens. It was another day in the Sean Diddy Combs trial, or so they thought. The judge's gavel hung poised. The jury's eyes darted toward the witness stand, and Diddy lounged at the defense table, his smirk a silent dare. Then the back doors swung open. No announcement. No entourage. Just Will Smith stepping into the light. Gasps rippled through the room. A reporter dropped her notebook. The judge's hand froze mid-motion. Will walked forward, his steps deliberate, his face stripped of the Fresh Prince charm that had defined him for decades. This wasn't the A-lister who'd smiled through 1,000 red carpets. This was a man who'd carried a secret for 20 years, and the weight of it was etched into every line of his expression. He didn't glance at Diddy. He didn't need to. The room knew why he was here. "I wasn't asked to come today," Will began, his voice low but steady, cutting through the silence like a blade. "I asked to speak." The judge nodded, and in that moment, the trial shifted. What Will Smith was about to say wasn't scripted for the tabloids. It wasn't a leak or a rumor. It was a reckoning, and it would burn through Hollywood like wildfire. It started with a phone call, the kind that comes through a trusted contact, polished and casual. "Diddy's throwing a party," they said. "His birthday. Just music, networking, the usual." Will had been to dozens of these, glitzy Hollywood affairs where stars mingled and deals were born. He didn't think twice. But the moment he arrived at the sprawling mansion in the hills, something felt wrong. Black SUVs lined the driveway like sentinels. Security guards, stone-faced, flanked the entrance. "Phone, please," one said, his hand outstretched. Will hesitated. "For privacy," the guard added, but his eyes said something else. Inside, the lights were dim, the music a low, pulsing rhythm that seemed to crawl under the skin. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting every move, every glance. It didn't feel like a party. It felt like a stage. Diddy found him within minutes, his smile wide but cold. "Will, your family now," he said, his hand gripping Will's shoulder just a moment too long. The words weren't a welcome. They were a claim. Will followed him to a back room, expecting a quick business chat. Instead, he stepped into a nightmare. Men and women, some faces he knew from billboards and screens, others far too young, moved in a scene that felt scripted for someone else's pleasure. Diddy stood at the center, laughing as if it were a game. Will's stomach churned. "I didn't know how to leave," he told the courtroom, his voice hollow. And that was the point. Days after the party, a call came. No name, no number. "Hope you had fun, Fresh Prince," the voice said, then hung up. Will brushed it off as a prank until an unmarked envelope arrived at his office. Inside was a flash drive, its weight heavier than it should have been. He almost didn't plug it in. When he did, his world tilted. The footage showed him at the party, slouched on a couch, laughing in a way that wasn't his. His eyes were glassy, his movements sluggish. "I don't remember being that out of it," he testified, his hands clenching the stand. Behind the camera, a voice, Diddy's voice, cut through the haze. "That's how we keep him," it said, casual as a business deal. Will's breath caught. "I wasn't invited to that party," he told the jury. "I was initiated." The invitations kept coming. More parties, more family gatherings. When Will declined, the consequences were swift. Movie roles he'd been negotiating vanished. Friends of decades stopped returning calls. Rumors bloomed online, whispers of infidelity, instability, secrets he'd never lived. "It was pressure," Will said, his eyes scanning the courtroom. Diddy didn't need to say it. He made silence the price of peace. Diddy's power wasn't just personal. It was a machine, oiled by PR firms, bloggers, and producers who knew how to bury a career or birth a scandal. Will recounted a deal in 2013, a campaign with a luxury brand. The contracts were nearly signed, the lookbook shot. Then he declined another of Diddy's invites. 2 weeks later, the brand dropped him. No explanation. Gossip blogs erupted with stories too specific to be guesses. Details only an insider could know. It was psychological warfare, Will said. You start to think you're crazy, but then you see the patterns. He saw it at a 2016 charity gala, where Hollywood's elite orbited Diddy like planets around a sun. An executive from a streaming giant slipped him a USB drive whispering, "Only you have the final cut." Will didn't know what was on it, but he knew what it meant. Diddy wasn't just a mogul, he was a gatekeeper, holding keys to careers, projects, reputations. Actors and rappers laughed too hard at his jokes, deferred to his every word. They weren't his friends, Will told the court. They were his survivors. For years, Will stayed quiet. He smiled through interviews, dodged questions, buried the fear that gnawed at him. But the whispers grew louder. Cassie's allegations, Meek Mill's name in the headlines, stories of others who dared to speak. If they're talking, Will thought, why am I still silent? Then came the call that changed everything. It wasn't from the prosecution or a reporter. It was someone he'd once trusted. Will, you're on one of those tapes, they said. They played it in court yesterday. The words hit like a fist. He hadn't known the tape existed. In a closed-door session with no press or jury, the prosecution played it. Will heard himself, his laugh hollow and wrong, slurring like he'd been drugged. Diddy's voice cut through, clear as ice. That's how we break them in. Others spoke his name, their words too vile to repeat. It wasn't just humiliating, Will said, his voice cracking. It was like losing my humanity. He stayed up all night, replaying memories, the party, the blackout, the envelope. I realized I wasn't crazy, he told the jury. I was remembering what I didn't want to. The humiliation burned, but the thought of his silence defining him, for his kids, his grandkids, burned hotter. He called the prosecution himself. I'm ready, he said. Whatever you need, I'll answer. The judge gave Will a rare moment to speak directly to Diddy. He stood, stepping closer to the defense table, his eyes locked on the man who'd haunted him for decades. Diddy sat motionless, his lawyer's whispers useless against the weight of Will's gaze. You built an empire out of manipulation, Will began, his voice steady but sharp. You called it success, you called it culture, but all you built was fear. He pulled a photo from his pocket, worn at the edges. This was me in 2004, he said, holding it up. Before your parties, before your leash. I haven't seen that man in years. The courtroom was silent, the jury's eyes fixed on the image of a younger Will, smiling without shadows. I saw what you did to those girls, he continued. I heard what you said about me when you thought I wasn't listening. You broke people for sport. Will's final words cut deepest. You said nobody parties like Diddy, he said, his voice rising. Well, nobody lies like you either. He turned, walked back to the stand, and left the courtroom without a backward glance. Diddy didn't move. His hands shook, his face pale. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control. The world outside the courthouse erupted. Clips of Will's testimony flooded the internet. Hashtags like #WillSpeaks and #DiddyFile trending within hours. Fans weren't just shocked, they were furious, raging at a system that had silenced their hero for so long. Old footage resurfaced, Diddy with industry titans, parties where smiles looked forced, interviews where Will flinched at Diddy's name. The receipts were undeniable. Hollywood scrambled, executives canceled meetings, agencies issued vague statements of concern. PR firms sent memos urging clients to cut ties with Diddy, but Will paid a price. Within 24 hours, 2 brand endorsements vanished. A film he'd shot halted promotion. Texts poured in, some from peers thanking him, others warning he'd declared war. One said, "You're radioactive now." Will didn't flinch. "I'd already lost something more valuable," he told the court. "My voice." He posted a single image online, a black and white photo of himself in 1993, a young actor grinning on a film set. "He didn't know what was coming," the caption read, "but he made it through. I'm proud of him." The response was seismic. Millions of shares, comments from survivors, especially men, who found their own courage in his. "You gave us a voice," one wrote. Inside the courtroom, the ripples grew. Rumors swirled of new subpoenas targeting not just artists, but executives, labels, even media giants. Whispers of more tapes, audio, video, sealed for now, hung like a guillotine over the industry. The judge's final words that day echoed, "This wasn't just testimony. It was a reckoning." Will didn't speak to the press as he left the courthouse. He walked out, head high, shoulders heavy with 20 years of trauma. "Relief isn't the right word," he later told a reporter. "It's just finished." He canceled appearances, declined interviews, and turned inward, spending time with his children, rebuilding what mattered. A friend told Variety, "He's healing now for the first time in years." The jury sat motionless as court adjourned, some with tears in their eyes. Diddy, for once, had no words. The era of silence was over, and Will Smith had torn it down, but the question lingered, as it always does. Who else was still out there, waiting to speak, and what would it cost them to break free? Imagine a dimly lit penthouse, the flicker of candles casting shadows on the walls, the bass of a hip-hop track pulsing through the air like a heartbeat. A young woman, barely 19, sits at a polished mahogany table, her hands trembling as she grips a pen. Across from her, Sean "Diddy" Combs leans forward, his voice low and commanding. "Sign this," he says, sliding a non-disclosure agreement across the table, "and your dreams will come true." The paper isn't just a contract, it's a shackle, a promise of silence that will bind her to a world she can't yet comprehend. She hesitates, but his eyes don't waver. "This is how the game works," he adds, the words landing like a verdict. She signs. That moment, that NDA, isn't an anomaly. It's a blueprint, replicated dozens, perhaps hundreds, of times over 2 decades. The problem isn't the singular story, it's the machine that churns them out. And the architect of that machine is Sean Combs. Diddy didn't just build a music empire with Bad Boy Records. He constructed a criminal enterprise, one that thrived on manipulation, coercion, and the complicity of an industry that looked the other way. From the infamous freak-off parties to a network of enablers who buried his secrets, this is a story of power weaponized to silence the vulnerable. The evidence is chilling. A 2016 surveillance video, grainy but unmistakable, shows Diddy assaulting his then-girlfriend Cassie Ventura in a hotel hallway. A brutal glimpse into the darkness behind the glamour. That footage, aired publicly in May 2024, isn't just a scandal. It's a warning of what's to come. A crack in the facade that reveals a sprawling web of abuse, control, and cover-ups. This isn't about one man's fall. It's about an industry that let him rise, and the victims who are finally breaking their silence. The courtroom is quiet now, but the echoes of that penthouse linger. The NDA, the promise, the threat, they're all part of a system designed to trap. And to understand how it worked, you have to go back to the beginning, to the moment Diddy first learned to spot his prey. In the early 1990s, Harlem's streets buzzed with ambition, and a young Sean Combs was already a master at turning dreams into leverage. As he launched Bad Boy Records, he wasn't just scouting talent, he was hunting for the vulnerable. His targets were young, often teenagers, aged 14 to 25, from broken homes or rough neighborhoods, their eyes wide with the hunger for fame. They were kids like John Doe, a 16-year-old rapper who caught Diddy's attention at a Brooklyn audition in 1995. "You're the next Biggie," Diddy told him, his voice dripping with promise. "But first, you gotta prove you're loyal." That loyalty, John would later learn, had nothing to do with music. It was about submission. Diddy's playbook was meticulous, a predator strategy cloaked in mentorship. He positioned himself as a savior, offering golden opportunities to those least equipped to question them. Programs like Flavor Camp, billed as artist boot camps, were less about training and more about selection. A former Bad Boy employee, speaking anonymously to investigators in 2024, revealed that candidates weren't chosen for their talent alone, but for their malleability. The ideal prey, someone desperate, isolated, with no one to turn to. Find the ones who are hungry, Diddy allegedly wrote in a 2010 email to his team uncovered during the federal probe. They'll do anything to get out. The process was insidious. Victims were invited to Diddy's homes, studios, or exclusive parties, each step drawing them deeper into his orbit. A female dancer, identified only as Sarah in court documents, recalled her first encounter with Diddy at 18. "I thought I was being groomed to perform," she testified in 2025, her voice steady but heavy. "But I was being taught to stay quiet." Flavor Camp wasn't a launchpad, it was a training ground for compliance. Diddy's team, assistants, scouts, even club promoters, combed through cities, schools, and early social media platforms like MySpace to identify targets. They'd approach kids at open mics, talent shows, or late night parties, dangling the promise of stardom. Once hooked, the victims were reeled in, their dreams weaponized against them. What made Diddy's approach so effective was its veneer of legitimacy. He wasn't a stranger in a dark alley. He was a cultural icon, a man who turned his own rags to riches story into a brand. To a teenager from the projects, his promises felt like salvation. But every invitation to a party, every late night studio session, was a step toward a trap. The auditions were real, the contracts were signed, but the cost of entry was something no one explained until it was too late. "This is how the game works," Diddy would say. And for those young enough to believe him, the game was already over. Once the trap was set, Sean Diddy Combs didn't need to use force, at least not at first. His weapon was subtler, more insidious. The atmosphere he created, a carefully curated blend of allure, fear, and inevitability. Picture a Miami penthouse, its walls lined with mirrors reflecting every angle of the room, the air thick with the scent of liquor and sweat. Diddy sits in a leather armchair, his presence commanding, his eyes locking onto a young woman handed a glass of champagne. "Drink," he says, not as an order, but as an expectation. She hesitates, but his gaze doesn't falter. "This is how the game works," he adds, the phrase a mantra that echoes through every corner of his empire. Cassie Ventura, his former girlfriend, described it in her 2023 testimony. "He didn't force me to drink, but his eyes told me I had to." That moment, that glass, was the first step in a psychological unraveling, a process designed to erase boundaries until victims no longer recognized right from wrong. Diddy's manipulation was a masterclass in control, a three-step descent into submission. Step 1, the drink, often laced with GHB or ketamine, blurring consciousness just enough to dull resistance. Step 2, the introduction of sexual acts, framed as part of the party's culture. The infamous freak-off parties were no spontaneous bacchanals. They were scripted performances, complete with strangers invited to participate, cameras rolling to capture every moment, and Diddy orchestrating from the center. A female victim, identified as Jane Roe in court filings, recounted her first freak off in 2024. "They handed me a red dress, checked my weight, 128 pounds, good enough, and led me into a room with mirrors everywhere. I felt like I was playing a role, and if I didn't perform, I'd be cut." Step 3, normalization. Over time, victims stopped questioning. They observed, adapted, and accepted the depravity as the cost of staying in Diddy's world. The September 2024 indictment revealed chilling evidence. Over 1,000 bottles of baby oil and vials of sedatives found in Diddy's Holmby Hills mansion. Tools of a machine built to break wills. Jane Roe's voice cracked as she testified, "They gave me a drink. When I woke up, I was on a screen, doing things I didn't remember." Diddy said, "Keep this quiet, or everyone sees. The mirrors in that penthouse weren't just decor. They were a metaphor for Diddy's control, reflecting his victims back to themselves, distorted and powerless. The freak-offs were theaters of compliance, where every act was choreographed to make deviants feel routine. A former party planner speaking to investigators described the precision. There were rules, weight limits, dress codes, no tattoos. If you looked tired, they'd drip you with drugs to keep going. Victims became actors in a play they didn't write, their shame recorded as leverage. The process was so gradual, so deliberate, that many didn't realize they'd been stripped of agency until it was too late. By the time they saw themselves on those screens, the game had already claimed them. But Diddy's control didn't end when the party did. The penthouse doors may have opened, but an invisible cage snapped shut around his victims. Non-disclosure agreements, often signed by teenagers as young as 14, were the first bars of that cage, carrying penalties of $1 million per violation. A 2024 court exhibit displayed one such NDA, its fine print a labyrinth of threats disguised as legalese. Beyond the contracts, Diddy built a surveillance network that rivaled a small intelligence agency. Drivers, bodyguards, assistants, and even lawyers formed a web, tracking victims' every move. A former bodyguard testifying anonymously admitted, "I was told to log every call they made, every address they visited. If they stepped out of line, I reported it." The system was airtight, designed to detect any hint of rebellion. When federal agents raided Diddy's properties in March 2024, they uncovered over 100 laptops and phones, a digital vault holding terabytes of freak-off footage, meticulously cataloged like trophies. The cage wasn't just technological, it was social. Diddy's parties were star-studded affairs, attended by A-list rappers, actors, and moguls, their presence lending an air of normalcy to the depravity. A victim recalled a chilling moment. "I saw a famous rapper watch as I was pulled into a room. He turned away like it was his cue." The silence of those celebrities was as crucial as the NDAs, a collective agreement to look the other way. Not because they didn't see, but because they knew when to avert their eyes. "It wasn't that no one saw," a witness later told prosecutors. "It's that everyone knew when to look away." That complicity, that unspoken code, turned Diddy's world into a prison without walls, where victims were watched, judged, and silenced by an entire ecosystem built to protect its king. The cameras stopped rolling, but the threat never did. For those who dared to speak, Sean "Diddy" Combs had a playbook to silence them, a ruthless machine that crushed dissent with precision. When Cassie Ventura filed her lawsuit in November 2023, accusing Diddy of years of abuse, the backlash was swift. Anonymous calls flooded her phone, their messages chilling. "You'll never work again." Tabloids, fueled by Diddy's PR team, branded her a gold digger, their headlines screaming betrayal. A female singer known for a single hit in 2009 faced a darker fate. After hinting at Diddy's secrets in a radio interview, her career vanished overnight. No gigs, no contracts, no trace. Whispers in the industry pointed to a car accident in 2017 that claimed a cameraman who'd allegedly kept copies of freak-off footage. The police called it a tragedy. Insiders called it convenient. Diddy's reach extended beyond threats and disappearances. He wielded media like a weapon, with outlets like Page Six publishing glowing profiles, such as a 2019 piece hailing him as a philanthropic titan, days after a victim filed an anonymous complaint. Churches, too, played their part, with pastors praising Diddy's donations while ignoring the screams behind his generosity. An email uncovered in the 2024 federal probe laid it bare. Diddy's PR team instructed an associate to handle a victim with a $50,000 payout, adding, "Make it quick." This wasn't about protecting an image. This was about rebuilding a god from the ashes of his sins. "I got a call at 3 a.m., a former Bad Boy intern testified in 2025, her voice trembling. "They said if I talked, my family would pay." Diddy's empire didn't just silence voices, it erased them, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and unanswered questions. But Diddy didn't operate in a vacuum. His power was propped up by the gatekeepers of pop culture, figures whose influence shielded him from scrutiny. Names like Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey, and T.D. Jakes didn't stain their hands with blood, but their clout cast a long shadow. When allegations surfaced, Diddy's team leaned on firms like Sunshine Sachs to orchestrate charity galas, where Perry and Oprah appeared alongside him, their presence a silent endorsement. A leaked 2020 email revealed the strategy. Get Tyler and O at the event. It'll drown out the noise. The noise was a lawsuit from a 22-year-old dancer buried under headlines about Diddy's generosity. T.D. Jakes, whose megachurch received millions from Diddy, preached sermons on forgiveness while sidestepping the accusations. Comedian Monique, in a 2024 interview, didn't mince words. They don't apologize. They buy silence. Her words painted a picture of a machine that operated like a cathedral, producing silence instead of salvation. Social media wasn't spared. X-posts from November 2024 expose an influencer paid $10,000 to post a video defending Diddy, calling him a victim of cancel culture. These gatekeepers didn't just protect Diddy, they laundered his reputation, turning a predator into a pillar of the community. I saw Oprah at one of his parties, a former assistant testified. She smiled, shook hands, and left before the real show began. Their power wasn't in what they did, but in what they chose not to see. Their silence as deafening as the music in Diddy's penthouses. Diddy's story isn't the heart of the problem. It's a symptom of a deeper rot. The real scandal lies in a culture that thrives on deliberate amnesia, where power is built on the bones of the silenced. Why did it take decades for the truth to surface? Who profited from the quiet? The 2016 video of Diddy assaulting Cassie Ventura, once a fleeting rumor, now plays on a courtroom screen, its grainy frames exposing a man who thought himself untouchable. But the light doesn't just shine on him. It illuminates an industry that watched, nodded, and turned away. Cassie, Jane Roe, and countless others broke the rules of the game, their courage cracking open a vault of secrets. Yet the question lingers. Who's next? What boy or girl, eyes bright with dreams, will step into a room lit by candles, a camera whirring in the dark? I signed the NDA at 17, Cassie said in her 2025 testimony, her voice steady. But I'm not signing my silence anymore. Her words are a call to arms, a challenge to an audience that's been complicit too long. This isn't just Diddy's trial. It's a reckoning for everyone who looked away. Will you keep watching the screen, or will you demand the light stays on? The game only works if we let it. The gavel may fall, but the story is far from over. The shadows cast by Diddy's empire still linger, and more voices wait to break free. Join us as we unravel the next chapters, tales of courage, betrayal, and truth that will shake the foundations of power. Stay vigilant, stay tuned, for the revelations are just beginning. Until then, thank you for standing with us in this pursuit of justice. Farewell, and see you in the light of what comes next.